The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Santa Rosa, California, and Dahlia Walsh felt the world slow to a crawl as she watched the barrel swing toward her chest. But before the smoke had even cleared, a tall stranger in a black duster coat threw himself between her and death itself. The impact sent both of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and desperation. Dahlia's bonnet flew off, her chestnut hair spilling across the dirt as she gasped for air beneath the weight of the man who had just saved her life. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, spreading dark and wet across the fabric of his shirt, and she felt her hands move without thinking, pressing against the wound even as her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. "Stay down," the stranger grunted through clenched teeth, his gray eyes scanning the chaos erupting around them. His voice was rough like gravel, but there was something steady in it that made her want to listen. More gunshots rang out as the sheriff and his deputies engaged the men who had been trying to rob the Santa Rosa Bank and Trust. The sound of horses screaming and men shouting filled the afternoon air, turning what had been a peaceful Thursday in September of 1878 into something out of a nightmare. Dahlia had only been walking to deliver her father's lunch at his shop when the robbery exploded into violence. She had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and one of the outlaws had spotted her as a potential hostage. His gun had been aimed straight at her heart when this stranger appeared like something out of a fever dream. "You are bleeding," Dahlia said, her voice shaking as she pressed harder against his shoulder. The warmth of his blood soaked through her blue cotton dress, staining her fingers crimson. "You need a doctor." "I have had worse," he said, but his face had gone pale beneath the dust and stubble. He was handsome in a rough way, with strong features that looked carved from stone and dark hair that fell across his forehead. There was something haunted in those gray eyes, something that spoke of too many years spent looking over his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine, thanks to you." Dahlia looked around frantically as the gunfire began to die down. The outlaws were either dead or fleeing, and the townspeople were slowly emerging from their hiding places. "We need to get you help." The stranger tried to stand, and Dahlia rose with him, supporting his weight as best she could. He was tall, well over 6 feet and solid as an oak tree. She was only 5'4", and even though she was strong from years of helping her father in his leather goods shop, she struggled beneath his weight. They stumbled together toward the wooden sidewalk, and several people rushed forward to help. "That is Owen Quinn," someone whispered nearby. "The gunfighter from Texas." Dahlia felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm California sun. She had heard stories about Owen Quinn, though she had always half believed them to be exaggerations. They said he was the fastest draw west of the Mississippi, that he had killed 17 men in fair fights, and that he had once faced down an entire gang single-handedly in a dusty town near the Mexican border. They said he was a man running from his past, drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. "Dr. Brennan's office is 2 blocks over," Dahlia said, adjusting her grip on Owen's waist. His arm was draped across her shoulders, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Can you make it?" "I can make it," Owen said, but his steps were unsteady. Blood dripped steadily onto the dirt street, leaving a trail behind them. They made slow progress through the gathering crowd. People stared and whispered, but no one else stepped forward to help. Dahlia understood why. In a town like Santa Rosa, gunfighters were treated with a mixture of awe and fear. They were useful when outlaws came calling, but they were also reminders of violence and death, things that respectable folk wanted to keep at arm's length. Dr. Brennan was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and capable hands. He took one look at Owen and ushered them inside his office, which smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Dahlia helped Owen onto the examination table, and the doctor immediately began cutting away his shirt to expose the wound. "The bullet went clean through," Dr. Brennan said after a moment of careful probing. "You are lucky, Mr. Quinn. An inch to the right and it would have hit your lung." "Luck has never been much of a companion of mine," Owen said, his jaw tight against the pain. His eyes found Dahlia's across the room. "But I am grateful for it today." Dahlia felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away. She should leave, should go find her father and let him know she was safe, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. There was something about this man, something beyond the heroic act he had just performed, that held her attention. "I need to clean and bandage this," Dr. Brennan said, reaching for his instruments. "It is going to hurt considerably. Miss Walsh, perhaps you should wait outside." "I have seen blood before," Dahlia said quietly. "I would like to stay if Mr. Quinn does not mind." Owen's gray eyes studied her for a long moment, and then he nodded. "I would appreciate the company." The next 20 minutes were excruciating to watch. Dr. Brennan cleaned the wound with carbolic solution that made Owen's entire body go rigid with pain, though he did not cry out. Dahlia found herself standing close to the table, her hands somehow finding his, their fingers intertwining as the doctor worked. Owen's grip was strong, almost crushing, but she did not pull away. When it was finally over, Owen's shoulder was neatly bandaged and his arm secured in a sling. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion, and Dr. Brennan insisted he stay in the back room to rest for a few hours. "I will check on you this evening," the doctor said. "No strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks, Mr. Quinn. That wound needs time to heal properly." After the doctor left them alone, Dahlia pulled a chair up beside the narrow bed where Owen lay. The room was small and sparse, with whitewashed walls and a single window that let in the golden afternoon light. "You saved my life," Dahlia said softly. "I do not even know how to begin thanking you." "You do not owe me anything," Owen replied. His eyes were half closed, but he was looking at her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "I saw that gun pointed at you, and I just moved. I did not think about it. But you took a bullet meant for me. That is not nothing." Owen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I have done a lot of things in my life that I am not proud of, Miss Walsh. I have killed men, most of them in fair fights, but that does not make them any less dead. Maybe stepping in front of that bullet was my chance to do something good for once, to save a life instead of taking one." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep inside Dahlia. She had grown up in Santa Rosa, the daughter of a leather worker and a schoolteacher who had died when Dahlia was 12. Her life had been safe and predictable, bounded by the familiar streets of this small California town. Owen Quinn represented something entirely different, a world of danger and uncertainty that both frightened and fascinated her. "My name is Dahlia," she said. "You should call me Dahlia, not Miss Walsh. I think when someone saves your life, formalities become a bit unnecessary." The corner of Owen's mouth lifted in what might have been the start of a smile. "Then you should call me Owen. Miss Walsh sounds like my school teacher, and she was a terrifying woman who once made me write 'I will not bring snakes into the classroom' 500 times. Dahlia found herself smiling despite everything that had happened. "You brought snakes to school." I was 7 and thought they were fascinating. She did not share my enthusiasm. They talked as the afternoon light slowly faded to evening. Dahlia learned that Owen was 30 years old, that he had grown up on a ranch in Texas, until his father was killed by rustlers when Owen was 16. He had tracked down the men responsible and killed them in gunfights that had given him his reputation. After that, he had drifted, unable to settle anywhere, always moving from town to town. I have been trying to outrun my past for 14 years, Owen said, staring at the ceiling, but it always catches up eventually. Someone always knows my name, always wants to test themselves against the famous Owen Quinn. I am tired of it, Dahlia, so damn tired. Then stay here, Dahlia said impulsively. Santa Rosa is a good town. We could use someone with your skills, but not as a gunfighter. We need good men who are willing to work hard and be part of a community. Owen turned his head to look at her, and something flickered in those gray eyes. I am not sure I know how to be anything other than what I am. Maybe it is time to find out. The door opened, and a man burst in who Dahlia immediately recognized as her father. Dahlia Walsh was a sturdy man in his 50s with graying hair and worried blue eyes. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Dahlia into a tight embrace. "Thank God you are safe," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I heard about what happened. I have been searching the whole town for you." "I am fine, Papa. This is Owen Quinn. He saved my life." Dahlia Walsh turned to Owen with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and assessment. He extended his hand, and Owen took it with his uninjured arm, managing a firm handshake despite his condition. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," Daniel said simply. "If there is anything I can do for you, anything at all, you need only ask." "Your daughter's company has been payment enough," Owen said, glancing at Dahlia. "She has a kind heart." Daniel looked between them, and Dahlia saw something knowing flash across his face. Her father had always been perceptive, able to read people and situations with an accuracy that sometimes unnerved her. "Where are you staying, Mr. Quinn?" Daniel asked. "I have a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street. "Not anymore, you do not. You are staying with us until that shoulder heals. I insist. It is the least we can do." Dahlia's eyes widened. Their house was small, just 3 rooms above her father's shop, but she knew better than to argue when her father used that tone. Besides, a part of her was thrilled at the prospect of having Owen nearby, of having more time to unravel the mystery of this complicated man who had literally taken a bullet for her. Owen looked like he wanted to protest, but Dr. Brennan returned at that moment and declared him fit to leave, provided he took things easy. With Daniel on one side and Dahlia on the other, they helped Owen down the street to the Walsh home. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for a day that had contained so much violence. The Walsh home was modest, but comfortable. Daniel had made most of the furniture himself, and the walls were lined with books that had belonged to Dahlia's mother. They settled Owen in Dahlia's room over her protests, while she insisted she would sleep on the sofa in the main room. "I am not taking your bed," Owen argued, but he was swaying with exhaustion. "You are recovering from a gunshot wound. I am sleeping on the sofa, and that is final." Dahlia's tone left no room for argument. She made soup while her father helped Owen get settled, and they ate together at the small wooden table. It felt strange and wonderful all at once, having this man in their home. Owen was quiet during the meal, but Dahlia caught him watching her with those intense gray eyes, and each time their gazes met, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. That night, Dahlia lay awake on the sofa, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. She could hear her father's gentle snoring from his room, and occasionally a soft sound from her own room where Owen was resting. The day's events played through her mind like a penny dreadful novel, too dramatic to be real. Yet the bloodstains on her dress, hanging now over the wash basin, were proof that it had all happened. She had looked death in the face today, and Owen Quinn had stepped between them. The image of him throwing himself in front of that bullet was seared into her memory. No one had ever done anything like that for her before. No one had ever considered her worth dying for. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Dr. Brennan visited daily to check on Owen's wound, which was healing well despite the man's obvious frustration at being confined to bed rest. Dahlia would bring him meals and sit with him, and they would talk for hours. She learned about his love of horses, his complicated feelings about his reputation, and the dreams he had long since buried about settling down somewhere and building a real life. "I wanted to be a horse breeder," Owen admitted one afternoon as Dahlia changed his bandages, her fingers gentle against his skin. "Before everything happened with my father, before I became this thing everyone fears or wants to challenge, I wanted to raise the finest quarter horses in Texas." "Stupid dream for a gunfighter, right?" "It is not stupid at all," Dahlia said firmly. "Dreams are never stupid. They are what keep us human, what remind us there is more to life than just surviving." Owen caught her wrist gently as she finished wrapping the clean bandage. His touch sent electricity through her arm. "What are your dreams, Dahlia Walsh?" She sat back, considering the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "I want to see the ocean," she said finally. "I have lived in California my whole life, but Santa Rosa is inland. I have never seen the Pacific, never felt the waves or tasted the salt air. And I want to write. My mother was a teacher and she loved books more than anything. She taught me to read when I was 4, and I have been filling journals with stories ever since." "What kind of stories?" Dahlia felt her cheeks warm. "Adventures, mostly. Tales of people doing brave things and finding where they belong in the world. Probably silly, romantic nonsense." "I would like to read them sometime," Owen said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip. By the end of the first week, Owen was able to move around the house, though Dr. Brennan still forbade any strenuous activity. Daniel had taken to Owen immediately, and the two men would sit together in the evenings, talking about leather working and ranching and the state of the world. Dahlia would listen while she mended clothes or prepared meals, treasuring these moments of domestic peace. But peace never lasted long in Owen's world. On the 8th day after the shooting, a man rode into Santa Rosa asking questions about Owen Quinn. Dahlia was at the general store when she heard the news, and her blood ran cold. She hurried home to find Owen standing by the window, his face grim. He had strapped on his gun belt, the one he had not worn since arriving at their house. The sight of it made Dahlia's stomach twist with fear. "You need to take that off," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Dr. Brennan said no strenuous activity. There is a man in town looking for me. His name is Jack Ridley, and he has a reputation almost as bad as mine. He is not here to make friends, Dahlia." "Then let the sheriff handle it." Owen turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was one she had not seen before, cold and distant. "The sheriff is a good man, but he is no match for Ridley. If this goes bad, people could get hurt. Innocent people. You are still healing. That wound could reopen if you get into a fight. Then I will be careful." Dahlia crossed the room and stood directly in front of him, placing her hands on his chest. She could feel his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palms. "Please do not do this. Please do not go out there and risk your life. Not when you are finally healing, not when you are finally finding peace." Something softened in Owen's expression. He reached up with his good hand and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin in a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. "I am not looking for a fight," he said quietly. "But if I do not face Ridley, if I hide behind you and your father in this town, then I am not the man I want to be. I am not the man you deserve." "I deserve a man who is alive," Dahlia whispered, Owen leaned down, and for a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I promise you, I am coming back. I have too much to live for now." Then he was gone, walking out into the afternoon sun with the lethal grace of a predator. Dahlia stood frozen for a moment before running after him, her father appearing from the shop below to join her on the wooden sidewalk. The street had cleared, people sensing violence in the air and making themselves scarce. Jack Ridley stood in the middle of the road, a tall man in a brown duster with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. He was younger than Owen, maybe 25, with the kind of arrogance that came from never having lost a fight. "Owen Quinn," Ridley called out. "I have been looking for you. Heard you got soft, hiding behind a woman's skirts in this nothing town." "I am not looking for trouble, Ridley," Owen said, stopping about 30 feet from the other man. His hand hung loose at his side, nowhere near his gun. "Whatever you heard, whatever you are hoping to prove, it is not worth it. I am not looking to prove anything. I am looking to make a name for myself by putting down the famous Owen Quinn. You are a relic, old man. Time for you to step aside." Dahlia's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, wanted to run between them, but she knew instinctively that would only make things worse. Her father's hand settled on her shoulder, a silent comfort. "I am done with this life," Owen said, and there was a weariness in his voice that broke Dahlia's heart. "I am done with the killing and the running and the bloodshed. I am trying to be something better. Walk away, Ridley, please." For a moment Dahlia thought it might work. She saw something flicker across Ridley's face, a hesitation, but then his pride won out and his hand moved toward his gun. What happened next took perhaps 3 seconds, but it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ridley's hand was fast, impressively fast, but Owen was faster. Even injured, even with his arm in a sling, Owen's draw was like lightning. The 2 gunshots sounded almost simultaneous, but only one man fell. Ridley crumpled to the dirt, his gun falling from his hand. Owen stood still, smoke rising from the barrel of his revolver. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dr. Brennan was running into the street and Sheriff Morrison was there, and everything dissolved into chaos. Dahlia ran to Owen, her hands reaching for him, checking him frantically for new injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he hit you?" "I am fine," Owen said, but his voice sounded hollow. He was staring down at Ridley's body with an expression of profound sadness. "I did not want this. God help me, I did not want this." The sheriff ruled it a clear case of self-defense, with dozens of witnesses who had seen Ridley draw first. But that did not seem to comfort Owen. He was quiet that evening, barely touching his dinner, staring at nothing. Dahlia sat beside him after her father had gone to bed, taking his hand in hers. "Talk to me," she said softly. "Please." "I killed him," Owen said. "I told myself I was done with killing, that I was going to be different, and then I killed him anyway." "He gave you no choice. If you had not drawn, you would be dead right now." "I know. But that does not make it any easier. That is the 18th man I have killed, Dahlia. How many more before I finally get what I deserve? How many more before someone faster comes along and puts me in the ground?" Dahlia moved closer, turning to face him fully. "Or you could stop running. You could stay here and build the life you told me you wanted. You could leave Owen Quinn the gunfighter behind and become Owen Quinn the horse breeder or the rancher or whatever you want to be. It is not that simple." "Yes, it is. You make it complicated because you think you do not deserve peace or happiness or a real life. But you do, Owen. You saved my life. You have been kind and gentle and good since you came into our home. You are so much more than your reputation." Owen looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the walls he kept around his heart begin to crack. "I am falling in love with you," he said. the words raw and honest. "I have been falling in love with you since the moment you pressed your hands against my wound and refused to leave my side. But I am terrified, Dahlia. I am terrified that my past will destroy you the way it has destroyed everything else good in my life." Tears spilled down Dahlia's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I am falling in love with you too, and I am not afraid of your past. I am only afraid of losing you before we get to have a future." Owen reached up with his good hand and wiped away her tears, his touch infinitely gentle. "I do not deserve you. That is not your decision to make. I choose you, Owen Quinn. I choose you every day and twice on Sundays." Then he was kissing her, and it was nothing like Dahlia had imagined kisses would be. It was desperate and tender all at once, full of promise and hope, and the recognition that they had both found something precious and rare. His hand tangled in her hair and she pressed closer, careful of his injured shoulder, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers again. "I am staying," he said. "I am staying here with you, and I am going to build a life that is worth living. I swear it." The next few weeks brought changes to all their lives. Owen formally gave up his gun, hanging his belt on a peg by the door and leaving it there. He began working with Dahlia's father in the leather shop, his hands proving surprisingly skilled at the detailed work. He also started making inquiries about land outside town, places where he could eventually start raising horses. Dahlia and Owen were inseparable. They took long walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He read her stories, offering thoughtful commentary that made her feel like her writing mattered. She introduced him to her favorite spots in Santa Rosa, the creek where she used to play as a child, the old oak tree where she liked to sit and read. They were courting properly now, with Daniel's blessing and the whole town watching. Dahlia did not care about the gossip, about the whispers that she was making a mistake falling for a gunfighter. She knew the man Owen truly was, and she loved him more every day. One evening in late October, Owen took her to the hill outside town where you could see the sunset paint the valley in gold. They sat together on a blanket he had brought, and Owen was unusually quiet. "I have been thinking," he finally said, "about what you told me, about wanting to see the ocean. I would still love to see it someday. What if we went? What if we took a trip to the coast before winter sets in? We could spend a few days there, just the two of us." He paused, then added, "as husband and wife." Dahlia's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Owen Quinn, are you asking me to marry you?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. His shoulder had healed well, and Dr. Brennan had declared him fit just last week. "I am. I know I do not have much to offer you right now. I have some money saved, and I am working on buying that land for the ranch, but it will be years before it is anything impressive. You deserve someone who can give you the world, Dahlia, but I am asking anyway because I cannot imagine spending another day without you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Dahlia said, tears streaming down her face again. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Owen pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone. "It belonged to my mother. It is the only thing I kept from my old life. I would be honored if you would wear it." The ring fit perfectly, and Dahlia stared at it through her tears, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. She was engaged to Owen Quinn, the man who had saved her life and stolen her heart. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Santa Rosa church. Daniel walked Dahlia down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Owen waited at the altar looking handsome in a new suit that he clearly felt uncomfortable wearing. Dahlia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers that Owen had picked that morning. The ceremony was brief but beautiful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Then they were running down the aisle hand in hand, laughing like children, ready to start their new life together. They traveled by stage to the coast, reaching the small town of Bodega Bay after 2 days of travel. Dahlia's first sight of the Pacific Ocean took her breath away. It stretched endlessly to the horizon, gray, blue, and magnificent, with waves that crashed against the rocky shore in explosions of white foam. Owen had rented them a small cottage overlooking the water, and they spent 3 blissful days there, walking the beach, collecting shells, and learning each other in the way that newlyweds do. Dahlia had been nervous about the physical aspect of marriage, but Owen was patient and gentle, making her feel cherished and safe. They stayed up late talking, made love as the sound of waves filled the darkness, and woke tangled together as dawn painted the sky. On their last evening, they sat on the beach watching the sunset, Dahlia tucked against Owen's side with his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you for this," she said quietly, "for making my dream come true." "You have made all my dreams come true," Owen replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I never thought I would have this, Dahlia. A wife I love, a home, a future that does not involve looking over my shoulder every minute. You gave me all of that. We gave it to each other." They returned to Santa Rosa renewed and ready to build their life. Owen had finalized the purchase of 80 acres of good grazing land about 5 miles outside town, with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needed work. They moved into the cabin in December, spending their first Christmas as a married couple in front of a fire Owen had built, eating a simple meal and exchanging small gifts. Dahlia gave Owen a journal where he could keep records of the horses he planned to breed. Owen gave Dahlia a beautiful leather-bound notebook for her stories, tooled with an intricate pattern he had made himself. They were simple gifts, but they represented their dreams and their commitment to supporting each other. The next year was hard work but filled with joy. Owen bought his first breeding pair of quarter horses, a magnificent stallion named Thunder and a gentle mare named Willow. He built fences and a proper barn, while Dahlia planted a garden and continued to improve the cabin. Daniel came out often to visit, clearly thrilled to see his daughter so happy. Dahlia discovered she was pregnant in the summer of 1879. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Owen. When she finally shared the news, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy despite her protests that he needed to be careful. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby, Dahlia." Their son was born in March of 1880, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Daniel Owen Quinn, after Dahlia's father and his own. Dahlia Walsh cried when they told him, and he was a constant presence in young Danny's life from the very beginning. Owen proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful in ways Dahlia had not expected. He would carry Danny around the ranch, pointing out horses and explaining everything in a gentle voice. As Danny grew, he became his father's shadow, toddling after Owen wherever he went. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Owen's reputation for breeding quality quarter horses spread, and people came from all over California to buy from him. He never wore a gun anymore, and the violence of his past seemed like something from another lifetime. Dahlia continued to write, filling journal after journal with her stories. She even sold a few to a magazine in San Francisco, earning enough money to buy glass windows for the cabin and a proper cook stove. Owen was fiercely proud of her accomplishments, bragging to anyone who would listen that his wife was a published author. 2 years after Danny's birth, they had a daughter they named Rose Margaret. She had Dahlia's chestnut hair and Owen's stubborn streak, a combination that kept her parents constantly on their toes. The cabin had grown with their family, expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a wide porch where they would sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and difficult winters, sick horses and financial worries. But they faced everything together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. Owen never regretted leaving his old life behind, and Dahlia never doubted her choice to marry him. One evening when Danny was 7 and Rose was 5, Dahlia found Owen standing by the corral, watching the horses graze in the fading light. She slipped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how different my life could have been. If I had not been in Santa Rosa that day, if I had not seen that gun pointed at you, if I had not taken that bullet." He turned in her arms, looking down at her with those gray eyes that still made her heart skip. "Everything good in my life started the moment I decided you were worth dying for. You were worth living for," Dahlia said, reaching up to touch his face. They had both aged in the 9 years since that fateful day, lines appearing at the corners of their eyes, threads of gray appearing in Owen's dark hair. But to Dahlia, he had never been more handsome. "You are still worth living for, every single day." Owen kissed her then, slow and deep, with the easy intimacy of a long marriage. From inside the house, they could hear Danny and Rose arguing about something, and they both smiled against each other's lips. "We should probably stop them before Rose hits her brother with something," Owen said. "Probably," Dahlia agreed, but neither of them moved for another moment, holding each other in the gathering darkness. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Danny grew tall and strong like his father, with a natural gift for working with horses. Rose proved to have her mother's way with words, constantly making up elaborate stories to tell at dinner. In 1887, they had another daughter, Clara, who was quiet and thoughtful, preferring to spend her time reading in the hayloft or helping Dahlia in the garden. Daniel Walsh remained a constant presence in their lives until he passed peacefully in his sleep in 1889, at the age of 65. Owen and Dahlia buried him in the Santa Rosa cemetery under an oak tree, and Owen stood with his arm around his grieving wife, grateful beyond words that he had gotten to know the man who had welcomed him into his home without question all those years ago. The Quinn Ranch became known throughout California as one of the finest horse breeding operations in the state. Owen took on several hands to help with the work, and he trained them not just in horse handling, but in living with integrity and purpose. He never spoke much about his past, but everyone knew the general outline of the story, and they respected him all the more for the man he had become. Dahlia published a collection of her stories in 1891, a book that received favorable reviews and sold surprisingly well. She dedicated it to Owen with the simple inscription, "To the man who taught me that heroes are real." Owen kept a copy on his bedside table and read it so many times the pages became worn. Danny married at 22, bringing home a sweet girl named Emma from town. They built a house on the far side of the ranch property and started their own family, giving Owen and Dahlia their first grandchild in 1895. Owen was utterly besotted with little Grace, just as he had been with his own children. Rose shocked everyone by announcing her intention to attend college in San Francisco, determined to become a journalist. Owen supported her completely, despite the raised eyebrows from some of the more conservative folks in Santa Rosa. He drove her to the train station himself, hugging her tight and making her promise to write every week. Clara, true to her nature, was content to stay at the ranch, working alongside her parents and brother. She had a gift for healing and often assisted Dr. Brennan in town when he needed help. There were whispers that she might marry the doctor's nephew, a young man studying medicine in Sacramento. In 1896, on a warm evening in September, Owen and Dahlia sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done thousands of times before. It was 18 years to the day since Owen had taken that bullet for her, and they always observed the anniversary quietly, reflecting on how much their lives had changed. "You ever regret it?" Dahlia asked, her head resting on Owen's shoulder. They were both in their 40s now, their children grown or nearly so, their hair liberally streaked with gray. "Taking that bullet, I mean. Everything that came after." Owen was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously as he always did. "Not for a single second," he finally said. "That bullet gave me life, Dahlia. Real life, not the half-existence I had been living before. It gave me you and our children and this ranch and every moment of happiness I have experienced. If I could go back to that day knowing everything that would happen, I would make the same choice every time." "I love you," Dahlia said simply. "I have loved you since you pressed your bleeding shoulder against my hands and told me to stay down. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Owen replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are the shot I never saw coming, the one that went straight to my heart. You saved me, Dahlia Walsh Quinn. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other completely. Inside the house, they could hear Clara moving around, preparing dinner. From the far field, Danny's voice drifted on the evening air as he called the horses in for the night. This was their life, built on a foundation of sacrifice and love, and the decision one man made to throw himself in front of a bullet. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Owen took Dahlia's hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown her since the beginning. She smiled and squeezed his hand in return, and they sat together watching the night claim the valley. Two souls who had found each other in the chaos of a moment and chosen to build forever from it. The years ahead would bring more challenges and more joys. Rose would indeed become a successful journalist, writing for papers throughout California and eventually authoring several books about life in the West. Clara would marry Dr. Brennan's nephew and open a small clinic in Santa Rosa, becoming the first female medical practitioner in the county. Danny and Emma would expand the ranch further, eventually taking over full management from Owen as he aged. Owen and Dahlia would become great-grandparents multiple times over, their house always full of visiting family and the sound of children's laughter. They would celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by 3 generations of Quinns, in a party that became legendary in Santa Rosa. But on this September evening in 1896, with the sunset painting the sky and their daughter humming in the kitchen, and their son calling the horses home, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of being together. Owen had taken a bullet meant for Dahlia, and in doing so, he had saved them both. He had saved himself from a life of violence and emptiness, and he had given Dahlia the great love she had always dreamed of finding. As they finally stood to go inside, Owen paused and pulled Dahlia into his arms one more time, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, and they stood there swaying slightly in the darkness. "Thank you," Owen whispered against her ear, "for choosing me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living." "Thank you for being brave enough to step in front of that bullet," Dahlia whispered back. "Thank you for choosing to live instead of just surviving. Thank you for being the man I always knew you could be." They walked inside together, hand in hand, to the warmth and light of their home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night, and through the windows, anyone passing by could see the Quinn family gathered around their table, heads bowed for grace, giving thanks for the food and each other and the miracle of the life they had built. The shot had been meant for her, but Owen had stepped in front and taken the bullet himself. And from that single act of courage and sacrifice, an entire world of love and family and purpose had grown. It was the best decision Owen Quinn had ever made, and he never regretted it for a moment. Not when that wound ached on cold mornings, not when nightmares of his old life occasionally woke him in darkness, not when people whispered about the famous gunfighter who had given it all up for a leather worker's daughter, because Dahlia Walsh had given him everything that mattered. She had given him herself, wholly and completely, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love story had started with violence and blood, but it had transformed into something gentle and enduring, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, peace over violence, life over death. As the years turned to decades and their hair went from gray to white, as their bodies grew slower but their love grew stronger, Owen and Dahlia Quinn remained inseparable. They were still taking evening walks when they were in their 70s, still holding hands across the dinner table, still looking at each other with the same mixture of wonder and gratitude that had marked their early days together. When Owen passed away peacefully in 1931 at the age of 83, with Dahlia holding his hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around, his last words were simple and true. "Best decision I ever made was taking that bullet for you." And Dahlia, tears streaming down her weathered face, kissed his hand and whispered, "Best decision I ever made was loving you back." She followed him 3 years later, dying in her sleep in the same bed they had shared for over 50 years. The family buried her next to Owen under a large oak tree on the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Dahlia Walsh Quinn, beloved wife, mother, and author. She believed in second chances and the power of love." The ranch stayed in the Quinn family for generations, a living monument to what Owen and Dahlia had built together. And in Santa Rosa, the story was told and retold of the gunfighter who took a bullet for a stranger and found redemption in her love, of the quiet woman who saw past a violent reputation to the good man underneath, and of how a single moment of courage and sacrifice could change the course of 2 lives forever. It was a story about choices and consequences, about the possibility of transformation, about the redemptive power of love. But most of all, it was a story about how sometimes the greatest act of violence can lead to the greatest peace, how sometimes taking a bullet meant for someone else is really taking a bullet meant for yourself, because in saving them, you save yourself. Owen Quinn had been a gunfighter and a killer, a man running from his past and his demons. But the moment he threw himself in front of that bullet meant for Dahlia Walsh, he became something more. He became a hero, a husband, a father, a builder of dreams and legacies. He became the man he had always wanted to be, but never thought he deserved to become. And Dahlia, who had been a quiet girl in a small town with dreams too big for her circumstances, became the woman who tamed a gunfighter's heart, not through force or manipulation, but through simple acceptance and unwavering love. She gave him permission to be vulnerable, to lay down his weapons, to build instead of destroy. Together, they created something that outlasted them both, a family and a legacy and a love story that was told around dinner tables and campfires for generations. They proved that it was never too late to change, never too late to choose a different path, never too late to become who you were always meant to be. The shot had been meant for her, but Owen stepped in front and took the bullet himself. And in that single heartbeat of time, in that fraction of a second when he made the choice to value her life above his own, everything changed. 2 lives were saved that day, not just one. 2 souls found their purpose and their peace. 2 hearts discovered that love was not just possible, but inevitable, when 2 people were brave enough to be honest and vulnerable and true. Their story became legend, but to those who knew them, who sat at their table and learned from their example and felt the warmth of their love, it was simply the truth. Owen and Dahlia Quinn had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and they had built a life together that was worth every sacrifice, every challenge, every moment of doubt or fear. As the sun set on the Quinn ranch in the years after they were both gone, their descendants would sometimes gather on the porch and look out over the land that Owen and Dahlia had built. They would think about the bullet that had changed everything, about the gunfighter who found redemption, about the quiet woman who saw what others missed. And they would be grateful, deeply grateful, that Owen had been in Santa Rosa that September day in 1878, that he had seen the gun pointed at Dahlia Walsh, and that he had made the choice to step in front and take the bullet himself. Because from that single act of courage came everything good that followed. A love that endured for over 5 decades, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, a ranch that became a California institution, and a story that reminded everyone who heard it that we are never defined by our past, only by the choices we make in the present and the love we give to the future. The shot was meant for her. The gunfighter Cowboy stepped in front and took the bullet himself. And in doing so, he saved them both and created a love story for the ages, one that proved beyond any doubt that sometimes the greatest act of violence leads to the greatest peace, and sometimes taking a bullet is really catching a blessing in disguise.